Looking for a guaranteed way to create content that resonates with your audience? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients and let them choose the topic of the interview. Because if your ideal clients care about the topic, there's a good chance the rest of your audience will care about it too. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to the B2B Growth Show, a podcast dedicated to helping B2B executives achieve explosive growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. I'm Jonathan Green.
And I'm James Carberry.
Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. We are here today with Ken Cheney. He is the CMO at Chef Software. Ken, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to chat with you today, Ken. We're going to be talking about really the why and the how to creating a category. This has been something that I've been learning about a lot lately, and so I'm excited to dig in with this topic with you. But before we do that, Ken, could you explain to our listeners, what is Chef Software? What are you and your team up to over there?
Yeah, so Chef Software is a software company focused on enterprise businesses. So we deal primarily with the Global 2000 as well as web innovators, so companies like Facebook and Amazon and Microsoft. And we essentially help organizations become high-velocity software-driven organizations and to essentially embrace what it means to become a software-driven organization through the use of automation. And we do automation at scale, where we help you automate infrastructure, applications, and your compliance and security so that you can allow your organization to become a digitally driven, software-driven business.
I love it. I love it. And so before we get into the why and the how of creating a category, I'd love for you to, share the chef story, because you guys have done this. You've been category creators. So talk to us a little bit about what it's looked like in your context, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So, Chef has been around for about 8 years now, and we were part of the early movement around what's called DevOps. DevOps is a kind of a cultural and organizational movement where organizations break down silos across their teams that are developing software, so that application developers and operations teams and security and compliance teams collaborate to allow them to innovate very quickly. And that's how our customers like Facebook use us, is to provide the foundation in terms of the tooling, the automation that allows them to collaborate across those teams at speed. And so we're at ground zero of that. And really, we're one of the vendors that has really grown up with the DevOps movement. And as we've grown, we've seen the fact that there are roadblocks that come up with customers all the time, and that quest for speed, quest for velocity. And so we've been investing in removing those roadblocks. And as part of that, investing in removing those roadblocks, we began to see that some of the markets that were adjacent to ours were markets that we could absorb, and markets that should, in fact, become unified. And so we began a quest really to define a market category that we call continuous automation, and to really carve out what that means. And in our world, when you look at markets, the markets are often defined externally by industry analysts like Gartner and Forrester, and customers really take their cues from those. And so we've been working very much collaboratively to get those markets defined, the category that we play in defined. And in this day and age, we see this continuous automation category being one where the category that we started in, which was configuration management, has merged now with another category called application release automation. And that's merged with another category called continuous integration and continuous delivery. You put all the capabilities that those three categories provided together, and you have a net new category that's emerged that, in fact, is a multi-billion-dollar high growth market category. That's a very interesting place to be in, which is, when you look at where you want to be solving big problems. You want to be solving large problems with large addressable markets.
I love it. So thanks for sharing that story, Ken. As we were talking about this idea offline, you mentioned that you really can't be competitive when you're product led. And that statement, I was like, oh, well, that seems to be, a pretty bold statement. Can you unpack that for me and explain why that's the case?
Yeah, I think that companies win by having a strong brand and a differentiated point of view. I think that when you're a product-led organization, the product is always front and center. And unfortunately, product-led organizations, competitively, it's very difficult to differentiate when you're differentiating on feature functions that are specific to your product. And the problem you have is that your competitors are always leapfrogging you, and you're always leapfrogging them. And so in the customer's minds, you end up in this feature function battle all the time with your customers. And what you need to do is you really need to pull back and set a contextual frame where the customers can really understand how you as a company are fundamentally different. What's kind of the secret that you bring to the table that nobody else has in the market that you can actually state very clearly. And so it becomes much less about the product as much as it is about what you as a company stand for. And one way to think about it, and the way I think about it, is that if you're a customer and you're buying from you, the vendor, you actually want to know that this company has a point of view, and that dollar that you invest today is a down payment on that vision that company's painting for you. Not just solving the problem you have today, but also that company's taking you on a journey that's going to lead you somewhere that holds real promise.
Got it. You equated it when we were talking offline almost to like a drag race versus a solo, being on your own versus being in a drag race. Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, sure. In a drag race, you're dealing with kind of a very defined set of conditions. You're told how much fuel you should use and the size engine you should use and what type of tires you should use. And so, the competitive landscape is being defined by others. When you have a differentiated point of view, you are really defining what you as a company want to be famous for very clearly in a way that stands out from everybody else in the market.
Got it. So it's one thing to understand this idea. And then the next part of this conversation that I want to focus on, Ken, is the mechanics of how do you actually get there. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, sure. So, where I usually start sounds it's actually very simple, is that I sit down with the executive team and I just ask the question, what do we want to be famous for? And when I ask that question, I think some of the important things we need to answer are, one, are we solving a big and urgent problem? Two, is it a problem that's going to be around for a long time, right? And then three, is it a problem that we actually think we can actually address? Is it within the scope of what's realistic for us?
Got it. And then if the answer to all three of those questions is yes, then you start to build strategy and culture around that. Is that kind of the first stepping off point?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things to understand is it's not just a marketing activity, it's a company-wide activity. And you can break the functions down into needing to look at the company design, which impacts the culture, business model, and such. But then you have to dive into what's your product design, ecosystem design. You have to dive into how you're going to think about conditioning the market, which is the marketing function. But all of that's in service of landing your point of view in the market and making sure that all of those things are aligned around that point of view. And that becomes really the North Star. And that point of view, really establishes what that category looks like from your perspective. And if you do it right, it drives the entire industry to adopt your perspective.
Interesting. Okay. And so were there some indicators for you guys at Chef that you started to say, okay, we're starting to accomplish what we set out to accomplish?
Yes, there were. We had been in this very infrastructure-centric space where we were automating servers and networking gear and storage and such. And we started to see the opportunity around applications and automating applications. And as we pushed into it, we began to see that there was a whole set of vendors that were really providing very legacy capabilities around application automation. And we saw that we could really easily extend our capabilities and help our customers in a way that no other vendor was able to do. And so when we started doing that, it was quite effective, right? And if you look at it now, you see companies like Facebook who they ship Facebook with Chef. And when they ship it, that includes all of the applications and underlying infrastructure used to support Facebook.
Wow. Securing that relationship with Facebook, did that come as a result of you guys owning that category?
It kind of went together, right? I think Facebook was one of the early ones where we learned, as we pushed out into it, we learned that it was doable for us. And then we really shifted our messaging and started pushing our efforts from a product perspective and company perspective into owning with our customers the entire stack from applications down through infrastructure and security and compliance.
Have you started seeing competition come around kind of this category that you guys have created?
Oh, yeah, we've definitely seen that, right? One, we've seen that we've actually created a very defensible, differentiated perspective on the market, and our capabilities are such that they really stand out in a differentiated way. So, having that unique point of view on where things are going has really shaped our product direction and strategy in a way that we got out of the drag race.
Got it.
Prior to this, we were very much kind of, oh, look at what they're doing. Let's invest to do something similar. And we've completely changed the game. So much so that some of our traditional competitors aren't who we see as much.
Got it. So in doing this, you've created this standalone category that you by default get to lead because you created it. And then what's been the process, Ken, for continuing to innovate within this category that you've now created?
Well, the process for doing that, it's kind of multifold, right? Like I said, analysts and media play a big part in helping establish your credibility in the market and conditioning the market. So we've put a big emphasis on making sure that they were very participatory and provided lots of input and guidance on this. And so there's been a big investment on that front. And then on the product front, obviously, there's a huge investment in understanding, what is the ecosystem that we're creating? How does our product support that ecosystem? And what is our product strategy within that ecosystem and the capabilities that we're delivering? So, you don't do it alone. That's the other thing I think that I'm trying to say, is that you don't do it alone. You want to be very clear about who are your friends and how you work together to provide value to the customer.
Got it. Are you familiar with Gainsight, Ken?
I am. Yeah, we're a Gainsight shop.
Okay. So I've talked to Anthony Kenneda, their VP of marketing, and he talked to us several episodes ago now about the same idea where they have created this category around customer success. And so by them really creating that category, now they've been doing this for a while now. And so they've got competitors that have popped up. But when I hear that story, I hear your story, I just think, man, there's so many upsides to creating a category and getting to lead the way in something that you've created as opposed to being in the drag race, so to speak. But have there been some downsides that you guys have experienced that, that we should share with folks listening to this? Or maybe like things to try to stay away from, or maybe things to avoid as they really start to think through what can be the category that we can create?
I think, one of the things I'll state is that as a business, you have your in-flight business, and you decide on this question as a team what you want to be famous for. But, it's not necessarily a problem Chef had, but in general, I think when I look at category creation, and especially for existing businesses, it sometimes means tough questions need to be asked about the market that you're currently in. Like the market you're currently in may not be the market you want to be in. You may look forward and be like, oh my gosh, this is not the market we want to be in. We actually want to be in a much different market. And, often you'll find yourself looking at the fact that you're in a small market where you're solving really kind of not interesting problems, but you're sitting on technology that could solve very interesting problems. And I think that's something, not just technology, but, a product that could solve a very interesting problem. And I think, it's very easy to get caught up in kind of the day-to-day of the reality of where you're at and not invest in the future.
Yep. I tell these stories all the time, but you think about, how the company that started Netflix should have been Blockbuster. The company that started Airbnb should have been Marriott. And so thinking about, because those companies had the infrastructure to execute on that type of innovation better than, the startups that ended up owning those categories, but they didn't. It was because of what you just said. They weren't asking themselves those tough questions. They weren't trying to put themselves out of business, as Gary Vaynerchuk says, and constantly in this state of how can we innovate? How can we continue to think outside the box? And so I think that's something that you guys have clearly, mastered and are doing, even in the category that you've created. So this has been fantastic, Ken. I really appreciate you sharing this with us. If there's somebody that wants to stay connected with you or learn more about Chef, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Well, they can go to the website, chef.io. They can also email me at ken@chef.io.
Love it. Awesome, Ken. Well, thank you again so much for your time. This has been incredible, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, James.
If you've been getting value from this podcast, you can help us reach more people by reviewing the show on iTunes. Here's how you can leave a review in less than a minute. Open your podcast app, and tap the search icon in the bottom right corner. Type in B2B Growth, then select our show. Once you're there, tap the Reviews tab and tell us what you think of the show. These reviews help us out a ton.
Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.